All right. Hi, everyone. We will still be letting folks in for a little bit here, as always. But thank you all for joining this kind of communication breakout session. So this will be a little different than the two sessions we did this morning, the other sessions at the summit. We'll spend most of our time kind of talking with each other and talking in the breakout rooms. Especially for the breakout rooms, I would say if you're able to turn on your video, that would be great because they'll be kind of small group conversations, so it's a little bit more engaging. But if you're not able to, totally fine. We're all zoomed out, I know, so 100% okay either way. So once again, in case you weren't here this morning, my name is Matt Gayer. I'm the co-executive director at the Catalogue. And really excited to kind of talk and also just hear and learn from you all about what's working and what's not in the communication space right now. It is a interesting, to say the least, time to be communicating as a nonprofit with everything going on, and especially as we think over the next couple of months. There's just so much noise and so many things happening. Thinking about how we engage, how we keep our audiences engaged is going to be really important. So how we'll do this session today, I have a couple of questions that folks asked prior to the summit that they wanted to talk about. So we'll start with those, but any questions you all have that you want to pose to the larger group, feel free to chat at any time. I'd also ask you all right now during the intros, if you just want to chat, again, kind of introduction, just kind of who you are in the organization you're with, so people can have a sense of who's in the room. So feel free to chat that right now, and then we'll break into breakout rooms in a minute here. So basically, I'll ask a question from the audience. You all will go to a breakout room together. For the first breakout room, we're going to give you a few more minutes just to go ahead and go around and do some quick introductions so you get to know each other just a little bit. Talk about the question. We'll come back in about 7 to 8 minutes each time, share out. So pick someone in your breakout group who's going to be able to share some of the things you all talk about and share some of the ideas you all share. We'll come back together, talk about those things, and then go on to the next question each time. So if you all, as you're doing introductions, if there are questions you want to be posing to the group, feel free to ask those. We'll get to those after we do the first couple here. So the first question we got dealt with social media, not surprisingly. A lot of you all have probably also signed up for the social media session later today. We had quite a few questions about social media as we were getting kind of ready for the summit. So the questions really were just how's your social media strategy shifted? Like how are you thinking about using social media right now with everything going on? And what's your plan for the next couple of months? So specifically leading into end of year across kind of August and September, how are you thinking about using social media at your organization? So I'm going to put you all in the breakout rooms here in just a second. We had a couple people join, so I want to make sure they get in a room. And then take about 7 to 10 minutes, do some quick introductions with each other, and then talk about, once again, how your social media strategy has shifted, what's your plan for social media over the next couple of months, and then we'll come back together as a group and share out some of the things we talked about. Hey everyone, always a good sign when everyone goes to the last second in those rooms, you know. No one's just jumping eagerly when we bring back. So would love to hear some of the things you all talked about in regards to kind of social media strategy or kind of plans for the next couple months.
One of the things that we talked about in our group that was common, well, actually the only thing we had time for, was the inability to get images for content. Like, you know, we have different struggles. A lot of us work in industries where privacy is an issue. So that was nice to hear that other people had that. So it's an ongoing thing. And then COVID makes it even worse because, yeah, you can't even get pictures of staff and stuff now in a lot of cases. And there were some really good ideas about using stock images. Somebody said that, and she was going to share the link in, I think, this big chat now. She just gave a thumbs up to Canva, which we all said was amazing, is doing a seminar on nonprofits. But yeah, we talked about using stock images in different ways, and that seems to be something that a lot of us are going to be doing. And realistic stock images, right? So you search for non-smiling person.
Yeah, what are other folks doing just for kind of visual content right now? Because I know that, you know, for some of our organizations, especially that work in, you know, domestic violence or with kids or protected populations, it's always an issue. But for all of us now, we're probably not in-person programming in a lot of cases. So even those of us that probably had photos don't now. So what are folks doing for visual content?
So I will say, so I was one of the ones who have struggled to get some images sometimes. So I work for a school. We're a child care and a school. So we serve 6 weeks old to 8th grade. Our child care center is open, so there are photo opportunities there, but the school is closed. And when we start next year, it will all be online learning. So I really tried to ask the teachers this year, like, hey, can you guys send me pictures and things you're doing so I can still show people our kids are learning? And some of them were great, and some it was radio silence. But some of the things they were doing, because you had the social distancing, instead of showing like we're giving this to a student, they would show pictures of what they made. So if they made a care kit, if they made some type of art project, they would show the picture of the kits or the art projects instead of showing like them handing it to them because of all the social distancing stuff, if that makes sense. So and then they would take like screenshots of the Zoom meetings, but you can only share so many of those too. But that's one thing that I have struggled with, and Britt also mentioned it too, and because I was in her group, but that's one thing that they tried to do.
Definitely, yeah. I think we've seen some people have success with they're taking pictures of some of the process a bit more than they probably would have, right? Usually our social media photos are just the end result, cute kids playing in the room, right? Or, you know, the clean river after we do our, you know, but taking pictures instead of, you know, us making the craft kits we're going to mail out, right? Or us, you know, we've actually seen some engagement even with just like photos of like, you know, like our like ad hoc workspace, like, you know, and being able to say like our staff are still here doing stuff. So I think as Jamie was talking about at the keynote, that authenticity piece is huge right now. And I think just showing that we're doing stuff is the big thing. That's a question a lot of supporters have. What else has changed for folks or questions they had in terms of kind of social media strategy these days? Or other things y'all discussed?
I know for I volunteer for the local Legion. And so the membership is 80 over, and they kind of know Facebook exists, but like, yeah, whatever, you know. And so it's been a challenge for me to not dumb it down, but put it into a context, into words that they can understand why it's important, and to get through all the different steps to be able to take pictures, to be able to put the stories on Facebook, to be able to, you know, so it wasn't even on their radar before the pandemic, even though their membership's gone down and everything else. But now it seems like the pandemic's kind of pushed them into the online world a bit more. So that's where it is with this organization. So it's an interesting time. Someone had told me 6 months ago I'd be trying to explain to the older generation why it's important and how it's going to help them. I would have told them they were crazy. So it's super interesting. So that's where we are.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of organizations are having to focus on it more, even if they were doing it before, taking it more seriously now, as we know that's now, it always has been for a while a pretty big communication channel, but now for some of us, it's the only communication channel we have with some of our community or clients, so more important than it's ever been. Any other questions y'all had? You also feel free to chat. Other questions y'all had on social media strategy or kind of digital engagement. We're going to talk about content separately in a second here, but or any plans for the next couple months on social media you wanted to either offer ideas or ask questions about. All right, well, we'll move on then to the next question we got beforehand, and also feel free to ask your questions in the chat, and we'll get to those throughout today. The next question was just a little bit about how you're balancing, and someone brought this up when Jamie during the keynote was talking about kind of the 10 touches and 9 of them being kind of stewardship or cultivation, 1 of them being solicitation. But just in general, how are you balancing keeping your audience informed versus overwhelmed right now? So really thinking about how frequently are you all communicating with your audiences? How frequently are you all, sending email updates versus kind of just social media posts versus maybe trying to like plan small events? And really just kind of what methods are you using? So a little bit about just kind of frequency and kind of methods for communication with your audience right now. So we'll go to breakout rooms again, thinking about that kind of, once again, kind of frequency and kind of the how, and then we'll come back together and talk about that next. All right. So we'd love to hear from you all. This is a question we've been going to ask a lot, that sometimes it feels like we're over communicating, but we actually know from our audience they want to hear from us a lot. So how are you all thinking about balancing that frequency, and what does that outreach kind of schedule look like for you all right now?
We actually had a very robust conversation in our breakout session about communicating with people, and we decided that based on our experience, the people that have already signed up to hear from us want to hear from us. So as long as you're not spamming them with a crazy amount of emails, we've tried to do it once a month, but I think that might not be enough, especially now because people are home and actually reading their emails more. So that gives us a different level of opportunity. But I think also that if you're providing information that is interesting, then you're not going to offend people. As long as you're not resending the same thing over and over and over again, they say, God, I've already seen that. Why would I do that again? That more might be a little bit more, might be a little bit better.
Definitely. Are other folks feeling similar, or maybe finding the same thing, that folks are responding a bit better to more communication than normal right now?
I think we hear more in our own nonprofit bubble about, are we emailing too much? And what I like to remind people is, how many times do you get an email from Starbucks? How many times do you get an email from Overstock.com? How many times do you get an email from all of these other business marketing platforms? We've chosen to sign up for those lists, and we get them at least daily, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. Those are companies that have budgets that have invested millions of dollars to try to figure out how much communication is enough and how much is too much. So, if those kinds of companies can email out daily and it's not too much, I kind of find our conversations in the nonprofit sector as, let's take the lessons we can learn from our business partners. Once a day is not too much for them. Why is once a week too much for us?
Mm-hmm.
I will say, to that point, they provide the more of the what's in it for me aspect. So I know if I'm opening an email from Starbucks, I know that there will probably be some sort of incentive, maybe a 15% off discount, maybe a free latte if I do X, Y, and Z. But that's also a way that we can think about our own strategies. What's literally, as we read these things, what's in it for me? What am I gonna get out of this email when I open it? Yes. Right.
So the issue is not quality, or is not quantitative. It's not frequency. It's content.
Yes.
Absolutely
Definitely.
agree.
And right now, I think one thing we know donors want is that, especially existing donors have already given us in the past, is that sense that like they've made a difference, right? And that through us, there's something happening. So what we're giving them a lot of times is that insight into client stories right now, is the insight into like what COVID means, or what the economic issues mean, right? Or what racial justice means for our clients. And those impact stories we have are what folks are looking for. So that's a great point. That's content, not frequency.
And not just donors, but that can also apply to the clients that you're serving. Because of the restrictions on socialization, one of the things that we found out early on is our families were struggling to connect with other families And so just hearing client stories gave them the reassurance that it's going to be okay. People are feeling the same way we are. People are having the same struggles we are. We can get through this together. So it was also a way to build some community amongst the people we serve by sharing those client stories.
Definitely. We're going to go into one more breakout room, and this one, and I know this question might feel like light years away, but I promise it's sadly coming up sooner than you expect, is what we're thinking about towards kind of end of year, just Q4 in general this year for communication. So as we're thinking about not just kind of the next couple of months, but more like October, November, December, if we are starting to think through strategies, how we're talking about our pivot by then. And I think a question we just got in was just how people are talking about what they're doing right now because things are still socially distanced versus balancing, highlighting the impact they'll have when they get back in person. So how you're balancing kind of the future impact you all will have versus kind of the programming you're doing now as it relates to kind of end of year giving and end of year kind of campaigns of communication. So we're gonna do one more breakout room on that. I'll bring you all back with time left to discuss that, and then we'll wrap up before the fundraising session in just a little bit. So I'm going to send out that breakout room invite right now. Great. So I know we only have a few minutes left, but I heard from a couple of folks the conversations were good, so I don't want to end them too soon. I'll say one thing we've heard and I think plan to do and are recommending for end of year communications is really having a very focused theme this year. A lot of you all probably do that normally, but this year more so than usual was just so much noise out there. Having kind of one theme we're building on that's going to cut through that a little bit and that people can kind of hopefully remember and pay attention to, it's probably going to be really important. What are some other things you all talked about? Maybe some kind of tips or ideas you all have or questions when you're thinking about communications towards the end of year this year?
In one of our group, someone asked, how do you work around asking the same people 2 times or 3 times for money during this time, since every activity you have spread out over the year will just be compacted in 3 to 4 months. So that was the last question on our group, and we were just talking about it.
Definitely. Yeah, and we've heard that from a lot of folks that maybe postponed a fundraising event until kind of this time of year, and they all started doing their end of year campaign, and they're also doing Giving Tuesday, and like maybe there's like another smaller event that you all are doing during that time. Definitely a common reality. I think a big thing we see, one, is segmenting our audience, right? So we're not necessarily asking the same primary audience every single time we're doing one of those campaigns. So there's probably room to kind of segment there. And the other thing I think is making sure we're thinking quickly. So if we, Giving Tuesday is a good example. We typically see folks that give a Giving Tuesday still give it end of year if they're typical end of year donors because they treat it as kind of a separate thing. They treat it as kind of a giving holiday almost. And then they still make their regular gift end of year. So they're going to be true as well this year for like if we're doing events or things like that. We just need to make it very clear what each campaign is for. The more specific the ask, the better there. But I do think that'll be a real challenge if we were doing a fundraising event post kind of middle of October. Will be a little bit tougher this year than maybe usual to kind of separate out. So if we can segment our audience at all, is a big recommendation there. Other things folks are doing when they're thinking about timing, because obviously it's going to be a little condensed this year. I think one other thing we saw, and then we can wrap up, but that we would recommend is starting your end of year campaign a little earlier than normal. So if you usually don't start till the beginning of December, maybe starting more like middle of November. If you usually start in November, maybe even starting kind of late October. One reason for that being that we just know with the elections, that'll take up a lot of headspace and a lot of noise and a lot of conversation, basically from like the last week of October through like the middle of November, right, at least. So that kind of 2-3 week period is going to be really hard to get our messaging out there properly. So either we're going to have to, so if we are, especially if we're doing an event as well, trying to maybe start that kind of end-of-year campaign closer to the beginning of October, even if we're not asking yet, but we're just trying to get the theme and the idea and the concepts out there. So we're ready to ask late November, because that early November time is probably not going to be a time that we're going to get a lot of engagement. So planning around that will be important this year.
Matt, I have a question quick
yeah.
about what you said about segmenting, because we're trying to work more on that, but I have a hard time sometimes convincing my boss. She's an amazing fundraiser, and she's always good at do the ask, do the ask, do the ask, but sometimes it's hard to convince her to not send stuff to some people, especially if they have been donors. So we've done a good job of being like, okay, these people aren't responding. Let's stop and think about how we can target them specifically. But I'm having a hard time imagining any campaign that she wouldn't be like, no, you have to send it to everyone who's ever, if they've given, you want to give them an opportunity to give. So how do you make that case?
So a lot of times it's about the saturation almost. So like maybe everyone does get one email about Giving Tuesday, that we're doing it right. We actually pick a smaller target audience that we're really going to go after for Giving Tuesday. So we still tell everyone, like, yes, we're doing Giving Tuesday, we'd love for you to give, but maybe we're focusing just on our volunteers, or just on, lapsed donors, or just on, grassroots donors under $150 donation, like whatever it is. But we pick a group, and that group is the one that we really kind of send multiple emails to and really try to activate. So kind of general awareness, specific activation. That's one way to make sure we're not leaving people out, but we're not kind of oversaturating everyone.
One of the things that we did with our COVID emergency campaign was, because we were sending out an incredible number of communications, we included just a little statement in the communication itself that said, if you have already contributed to the campaign, thank you for your gift. So that there, in everything that we were sending out, there was at least an acknowledgement that some people might have already given. It's just a little hat tip to that small group of people that have the reaction of, oh my God, I've already given, why do you keep asking? The reality is the number of people that have that is really pretty small compared to your overall list. And the larger strategy is, let the donor decide when they're ready to give. Our job is to ask, and only ask. The donor's job is to decide when they're to give. And so when we start debating how often do we ask, what we're ultimately doing is taking the decision making away from the donor. So that's a really precarious balance that we need to try to figure out, frequency versus oversaturation.
I was just going to jump in to reinforce that, because the number one reason that people give for not giving is that they weren't asked. So if somebody manages to miss your mail in the flood of mail that came in when they were on vacation, when they had a bad day, whatever it was, and you send another solicitation, you don't expect everybody to respond to every solicitation you have. And if you do have specific donors that feel that way, then don't mail those people when you send out those batch mails. But certainly keep mailing to people.
Especially if you're including very strong, poignant stories about the effect of your organization. Even if somebody doesn't give, you're priming the pump for a future gift by including those strong client stories in your ask.
Definitely, yeah. I think across the end of year this year, it's going to take a few rounds, right, to really be able to touch people, just because of the amount of noise that will be going on, sadly, during that time. So thank you all. We will, as part of the summit follow-up, put a summary of this conversation together, so you have it along with the other two peer conversations that are happening right now. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap up, because I will be teaching our fundraising during COVID workshop now. So hopefully you'll join us there. We'll see you all in just a second.